This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
Only thing these three teams have on us is they're just getting us in the way of points. We're not playing them for anything or, position like we're trying to catch them. It's, but it's an opportunity for us to get points in these non-4-point games, and so they're extremely important for us. It's our last trip out west, and we're playing two teams that are firmly Stanley Cup contenders and another team that's trying to break their way into the playoffs. So this will be three really tough games for us, and I guess we're going to see where we sit.
Oh, see where we sit. What do they call this? A measuring stick game? Do we even say that this late in the season?
I think it's a measuring stick game for the Lightning.
What are we
They're
measuring?
facing a really hot team at home, especially. You can see where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in the F150
Where are you sitting?
Club.
You at a bus stand?
No, this is the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas. I was actually very pleased with this background, Greg.
Yeah.
Not that we owe anything to Ford, but as compared to some other backgrounds I've had in the arenas as we're doing the show, I thought this was colorful and nice, and it was
Very
one of the
colorful.
rare places in the building other than the press box where I had a tabletop. So
As Steve
Ford
said,
is a proud partner of the Lightning. Thank you, Steve.
we didn't plan that, folks, by the way. but
Yes. I don't know if the Tampa Ford group is trying to promote their F-150, but we're giving them some advertising.
We're allowed to promote.
The video stream. Yes. So look, the Stars are going to make the playoffs.
Yep.
The Stars have Stanley Cup aspirations. The Stars have been a team that's gone deep in the playoffs in the last 5 years. I'll include 2020 because they got to the Stanley Cup final. They were a bit of an upstart in that they knocked off some teams that were maybe viewed as better than them in the bubble, but they won those series. They beat Vegas, they beat Colorado, and then they lost to the Lightning. But since that loss, remember the next year the Stars and Lightning were in the same conference, and the Stars had to go much of the year without Tyler Seguin, and they ended up missing the playoffs. Nashville got the 4th spot, and the Stars finished 5th. But since then, starting in 21-22, the Stars have really been among the elite teams in the NHL. And, they've had some runs pretty deep in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Lost some frustrating series. Last year they lost to Edmonton, even though they had home ice. There was one year, I believe the year Vegas won the Stanley Cup, the Stars lost to them in a 7th game. I believe it was the 7th game. It was a fairly deep series, but it was the conference final. So look, it's not just like they've come out of nowhere. They have been a good team. They are still a good team, and they are looking at raising that trophy. So I think this is a measuring stick game. They're also, as I mentioned, playing very well at home. They've won 8 straight here. They haven't lost here since the middle of January. And I was a little surprised to read this, Greg, that this actually matches the team record. They're distinguishing between team and franchise because this franchise started in Minnesota as the North Stars. They moved here in the early 90s. But since the team has been in Dallas, there's only been one other instance when the Stars have won 8 in a row at home. That's it. They've won a cup since they've been the Dallas Stars. They've had top teams since they've been the Dallas Stars. So this team is looking to set the team record, Dallas Stars record, for most consecutive home wins if they can beat the Lightning tonight. The franchise record is 11, set by Minnesota North Stars back in the, I think it was the 90s that they won 11 straight, early 90s, before they moved. So, look, this is a test for the Lightning, and I think they played very, very well in their win against Boston. They played less well in the win against Philadelphia. They're going to need to elevate tonight.
When you look at Dallas and the history of that organization over the last 10 years, they've had, to your point, a lot of solid showings in the playoffs. If you go back all the way, partner, to 2018-19, lost in the second round. Then they lose in the Stanley Cup final to Tampa Bay. Missed the playoffs the next year.
Yeah.
Then back in 2021, they lose in the first round.
That was the series. They were the lower seed.
They went 7 with Calgary.
They went 7. They took Calgary to 7 games, and Ottinger was unreal. So,
yeah.
All right, in fairness, Their team really is elevated the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But that experience of getting in the playoffs and almost stealing that series clearly helped them.
Yet
Helped their young players and gave Ottinger a ton of confidence. He almost single-handedly won them Game 7. I mean, I can't remember how much they were outshot, but we can go back and look at the box score. That was the Calgary team that had Matthew Tkachuk, Lindholm, and Johnny Gaudreau. They had cup aspirations, and in some ways, the difficulty of that series for the Flames may have had an impact on the fact that they lost in the second round to Edmonton in 2022 playoffs.
so that was final OT, the 3-2 game.
They lost in overtime.
Hold on. He faced 67 shots.
Yeah.
And made
I didn't remember
64.
it was that many, but I mean
64.
overtime.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
and how many
I mean,
shots
still.
did the Stars have? Like the ice was completely tilted.
Yeah,
the
it was
whole
tilted.
game.
And then they had two, back-to-back conference finals.
Right.
That they played in, to your
Lost
point.
to Vegas, lost
Yeah.
to Edmonton.
The real interesting thing about them is I have made the comparison. Maybe it is incorrect, but you think about the teams, and they're mostly the teams out west that I feel this way about. Maybe the Islanders to a lesser extent in terms of how much regular season success, and did it ever really translate to postseason success? The Winnipegs, the Dallases. These are teams who've had what I have always felt like pretty deep rosters in a cap era. If you kind of look at all the levels, offense, defense, goaltending, they have elite players and multiple elite players
Yes.
at every spot, and they just haven't been able to seal the deal. But what they've done, and we talked about this the other day on the show, they've almost had like a second go around of elite play, complementing what Sagan and Ben did.
Yeah.
And then the new
And
wave
Spezza.
of players.
I mean, they
And Spezza was
ended
good,
up
yeah.
moving on from Spezza,
Yeah.
but they needed a reset. And that's probably the right word for it. Sagan has
Probably.
had a lot of injury problems.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a pretty impactful first game between the teams. I remember he set up Duchesne for the winning goal in the third period, but he got hurt shortly thereafter. He's been out ever since. So they've not been able to rely on Sagan. Ben, and I'm actually going to amend what I said about Ben yesterday, because you had mentioned Ben is at 399 goals. So his next goal will be an historic one. And it's going to be the second most, again, in team history. Madonna is the only other Dallas Star to get over 400 goals. But I kind of made the assumption, and it was not completely accurate, that Ben, it looked like the tread was coming off the tires and he's had a resurgence. He's been very consistent in producing goals and producing points. He's not producing at the same level as he did 10 years ago, okay? No. But he's not the same player that he was 10 years ago. But it's not like he had a major dip and this has been a bit of a renaissance season. He has been fairly consistently,
productive
in that 20 to 30 goal range, right? So that's how you get to 400. I mean, it's not like he had a year where he scored, 60. So he's just been very, very solid. Now, there were some times when he had to do so much heavy lifting for this team. Now they have surrounded him, and he doesn't have to be the guy. He can be a guy, and he is an important guy for their team. But they've got Robertson. They've got Hintz. They've got Heiskanen. Thomas Harley, I mentioned him. I mean, Harley's offense has been all year, but he's really picked up the slack since Heiskanen went down with an injury in late January. They have some good players on this team. Wyatt Johnston is on a 15 home game point streak. That was another note that the Stars had in the game notes. So they have surrounded Ben with Duchesne. I mean, Duchesne's not a spring chicken. He's, 34, 35 years old. But, he's a point per game guy.
Yeah.
So it's not all on Ben. And I think that goes to what you were saying, which is they have strength at just about every position.
They do. They
have high-end players at every position, and they have depth at every position. I mean, Ottinger doesn't really need depth because, he's going to end up playing 60-plus games.
I didn't realize Casey DeSmith, former Penguin, is backing him up. Actually, doing pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's I think he's played about 20 games so far this year. So the ratio is, Ottinger's getting
He's 12-6 though.
5 out of
I mean,
every
that's not
7.
bad.
Yeah,
that's not bad for your
he's had
backup.
a good home record.
Yeah,
he's had as the team has done better at home than on the road.
Right.
It's a little. It's kind of like the Lightning, actually. The Lightning don't have as good a home record as the Stars, and the Lightning are currently at Hockey 500 on the road.
That is correct.
I mean, to get above Hockey 500 tonight, they're going to have to beat a team that hasn't lost here in, basically a couple of months.
What's funny is, not funny, it's you kind of take a look at, you mentioned Seguin and Ben. I'll even throw Duchesne in there.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers, when they're done playing, you could borderline Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
Borderline.
400 goals, though,
Not-
is going
not
to be
yet.
tough.
No, that's
Yeah.
what I meant. Borderline. Like if he were to win a cup, and let's say he gets to like 450 by the time his career's over, he'd have to play a couple more years, maybe beyond this, at hitting 20, 25 goals, and maybe you're there. Duchesne's been a point machine, and even at his age, I mean, that to me, he may have a case. He might be one of those guys that could get to 1,000 points. 1,000 points, you start at least having those conversations. And Seguin, for a few years was one of the better not power forwards, one of the better forwards in the game.
Yeah.
But they've all maintained a certain level of production well into their careers, which I think has helped them really become supporting characters, although I think Duchesne's elevated his play more than the other two with some of the younger guys that you have mentioned and that I have discussed. And Ottinger, is it fair to say, Dave, when you start talking about elite goaltenders in the game, he's in that top 5?
Yeah. I mean, well, how do we view goalies under the lens of how they are viewed around the league? And some of it is based on their numbers. How many games are they winning? What's their goals against? What's their save percentage looking like? But some of it is too related to games played, because so many teams are electing to kind of split the load. There are far fewer teams that are basically giving the vast majority of the games to one guy. The Lightning are one of those teams, as we've talked about. Vasilevsky is going to play 60-plus games, assuming he stays healthy, no other external factors coming into the mix. He's going to get 3 out of every 4. Shesterkin, Hellebuck.
So I think you start with those.
I think Sorokin might be there. I mean, the
Is he
Islanders
there?
were really committed to that split. I feel like he plays more now in the last couple of years, but Ottinger's another one. So what does that tell us? That tells us that on a really good team, which the Stars are, he is their guy. They have confidence that he not only can handle the workload in that, he's not going to break down, but he's also going to give them really high-level play, playing 60-plus games a year. And that is almost more significant than the numbers. I mean, if the numbers were ugly, he wouldn't be getting all the starts, right? The team wouldn't be as good. So kind of one follows the other. But look, there are some high-end goaltenders who maybe aren't playing as much, and I'd probably have to put on my thinking cap to think about who they are. I mean, Bobrovsky's in that category too. I should include him. But look at Toronto. Who's going to be their guy in the playoffs? Is it Woll? Is Woll going to be the guy? It seems like they like him a lot, but not to the point that they're like, yeah, you're going to get 60 games.
Right.
At least not this year. What about Washington? Who's going to play in the playoffs for Washington? Right now they're basically splitting between Lindgren and Thompson.
Yeah.
Now they like it. It's worked for them. But does that mean that maybe they don't have the faith that one of those guys can handle that workload? Or maybe it's just an organizational choice that they don't want either one to wear down. But at some point, you're going to have to decide who's starting game 1 of the playoffs.
Right.
And is it going to be that guy's net, no matter what happens? Remember, we saw that merry-go-round with the Panthers in 2021 where they used 3 goalies in a 6-game series.
I still
Things
maintain.
have changed dramatically in Sunrise since then, where Bobrovsky is like, it's his net, but in 2021 it wasn't.
I still maintain, and I know there's been a shift, and I know there's been a movement to not have your number one have as big a load in the regular season. I just think in the postseason, if you don't have that number one guy, if you have two goaltenders, you probably don't have one. I will maintain that.
Yeah.
Especially the most important position. You can pull it off, but at some point, you're going to be exposed, I think. And so the Lightning haven't had to worry about that since Ben Bishop.
No.
Really, they have not had to worry about their goaltender position. Think about that luxury. And think about all these other teams that have had to look at what they're doing. So, more of an observation. This is a measuring stick for both teams. Is it going to impact anything moving forward? No. I just think it's going to be it should be a well-played game against two teams who are at the top of their game. And I think that's all we want to see, and I think that's fair. Jay says, while it's appropriate in certain situations, the Lightning's propensity to pass the puck backwards in their own zone makes me think they won't be going far in the playoffs. Just too risky. Elite teams break the puck out straight up the ice. I think he says elite teams bring the puck out straight up the ice.
I'm not sure if Jay is referring to what they do on the power play, which is something that a lot of teams do. Probably not. He's probably talking about breakouts on 5-on-5. I have to be honest, Jay, I'm not sure. When they're not facing pressure, I'm not sure that they drop the puck back. What I notice is, and I'm not a huge fan of this, but I understand that they aren't the only team that does this. When there's pressure, mild to heavy pressure, anywhere in that range, and they're trying to break the puck out, sometimes they bump it back. They're on the sidewall, and they bump it back behind the net. And sometimes it works. Sometimes you get it to an open guy. It's a defenseman, and that guy has a little bit more open ice to execute a clear. But sometimes you're inviting more forechecking pressure. And if that bump back isn't handled by the defenseman cleanly, now it's behind your net. And the other team is sniffing and hungry, and it can invite problems. I'm not sure if that's what Jay is talking about. I have not really noticed them doing the drop pass when it's just a clean breakout, right? And they have a controlled breakout, and the other team is kind of sitting back in the neutral zone. So if you want to write us back, Jay, and maybe give us more specificity, that would help. I'm going to kind of come back to this. We went over the Lightning's defensive numbers yesterday.
Yes.
They're very, very good. Mm-hmm. They're very good 5-on-5. They've been good on the penalty kill. I think when you look at scoring chances against, that number has gone down from last year. So if there's a part of their game that is kind of part of how they run their system that fans are like, this doesn't seem right to me. We're not 10 games into the season. We're almost 70 games into the season. And look at where the Lightning are defensively. So it's kind of difficult to argue against what they have done.
Yeah.
5-on-5, power play, shorthanded. They've done a good job of keeping the puck out of their own net, and they've done a good job of limiting opposition scoring chances. So I don't know that you can predict how things are going to go in the playoffs, no matter how a team plays. Generally, though, I agree with Jay's premise that if you have a chance to move the puck up the ice directly, do it. But I'm not sure the Lightning don't do that, except when, they're under duress and they're trying to find somebody with a little less pressure on them. And sometimes they look for that bump back and try and switch kind of the exit point to the other side of the ice.
Yeah. Different ways to do it. And we've certainly had some questions about that approach. And I think when you look at the Lightning, and particularly on the power play, and how they do execute bringing it up, they are like a lot of teams, and we've seen the Lightning do this to other teams. We have seen the Lightning make teams uncomfortable bringing the puck up, and when you have that drop pass back to the forward coming with momentum or the defenseman, and they are the last guy back there, and you make a really good play, you are going to leave yourself in some vulnerable chances. And whether that's 5-on-5, by the way, or on the power play, it can happen both. I think teams have become very good at scouting one another, but I also think a lot of teams, partner, have had practice seeing the same thing over and over again, because most teams do the same thing over and over again, especially when it comes on the power play. But I think when those situations do break down, sometimes it is just better to cross center ice, bang that thing in, and go after it. And I think when you look at the Lightning at times when they've struggled this year on the power play, some of it has been getting it in. Some of it has just been the inability to shoot the puck. And, I think that's one of the things we want to see a little bit more of moving forward. The Lightning are never going to be a team, Dave, that, at least I don't think, a high shot volume team, at least I don't look at them that way. Or when they don't, it doesn't necessarily mean that things are going south. I think they have the tendency to pass up shots, but I also think it's twofold. I think when you're a really skilled team, sometimes you think the extra pass is the best pass. Mm-hmm. And I also think because of the way goaltending is today and how challenging it can be, I think a lot of teams make the extra pass, not just Tampa Bay. So I think those are some things to keep an eye on when the Lightning are struggling a bit, particularly bringing the puck in on the power play. The guy bringing it in, is he having issues? And when they do finally getting in, are they not having more of a shoot-first mentality to keep things simple? And Chief often talks about keep it simple, stupid. Mm-hmm. And I think you could apply that to everything on the ice when you are struggling. But I think especially on the special teams component of things, you definitely want to, when you are fighting the puck, when you are struggling, if you can keep it simple, more times than not, the Lightning's best players will figure out how to make a play. But sometimes to get it in, you've got to just be, okay, we got to simplify things here.
Yeah. And sometimes they get into trouble when they overcomplicate things.
They do.
I think Jay's comment, hearing it, I think he's talking about 5-on-5, because if he's trying to imply that the Lightning are the rare team that uses the drop pass on the power play, that's just not factual. Most teams use that.
Most teams are, yes.
And I will say this, like we mentioned that Brian Boyle play back when Brian Boyle played for the Lightning and he stole the drop pass. I remember he scored a shorthanded goal.
Yeah.
Usually the entry that starts with the drop pass, the problem occurs actually at the offensive blue line. It is not the drop pass itself. And like sometimes the drop pass is offline and like Hedman is dropping it to Point or Kucherov, or Point is dropping it to Kucherov. It might be offline, and Kucherov or Point, they have to like wind up again, right? They have to go get the puck because it was not on their stick. It's rare to see that drop pass just get intercepted, and maybe the penalty killer is wanting to make sure that he doesn't get out of position, right?
Right.
What we see more often is that drop pass does allow the trailing forward, whether it's Point or Kucherov, to attack the offensive blue line with speed. That's the idea. And sometimes an extra pass is required kind of side to side to get it across the blue line. And the penalty killers tend to line up at the blue line, right, which would invite trying to shoot it in. A lot of teams try and carry it in. Problems occur more, I think, at the blue line. And we've seen Hagel and Cirelli do this to the opposition power play unit. Hagel and Cirelli are capable of breaking up that entry attempt where the guy's trying to carry it in, and now that guy's momentum carries him in the wrong direction, and Hagel and Cirelli have the puck, one of them,
right.
And they're countering. And that sometimes happens when the Lightning are on the power play too. So Phil hates the drop pass. It's not the only way to execute an entry, but it's kind of been in vogue, and it's been in vogue for several years in the league. The last thing I'll say about Jay's point, maybe Jay is talking about when the forward has the puck in the neutral zone and is at the end of a shift, and he'll drop it to the defenseman to go to the bench for a change. And we see we do see that. And it's not only the Lightning that do that. That might not be what you're talking about, Jay, but I can't say I have a problem with that. You are kind of like dumping your problem onto the defenseman. You're like, I'm tired. I need to go to the bench. Usually it's done. The defensemen don't also maybe need to get a change, but it's going to happen when there's not as much up ice pressure and the forwards are trying to get a controlled line change in there rather than be stuck out on the ice. So again, sometimes these tweets are hard to decipher. Particularly we don't have a video to show as well, but we did our best to answer your question / concern, Jay.
Sure. We had this question from Facebook come in. Brian says, I think they are a quality over quantity team for sure.
Must be talking about shot selection.
Has to be.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think most skilled teams are. You know, it's funny. Do we look at Carolina as a really skilled team? They have skill.
Right.
But when you talk about Carolina, it's usually a lot of shots.
Yeah.
Right? And
Florida's the same way, and Florida definitely has some
they have skill.
like high-end guys
Yeah.
on their team.
Yeah.
By the way, the
Something
Lightning are about to take the ice. We're an hour behind you guys, so 11:30 Central. So the team is just filtering out on the ice. And
So what you're
I
saying
would
is-
expect they had a full skate yesterday, so we'll see if this is an optional or not. It actually looks like it might be an optional because I only see about 6 or 7 players out there. But I'll keep you posted.
I've seen this question a lot being thrown around from Bolts fans, I think around the NHL in general, because a lot of people have been talking about call-ups and are we going to see anybody, from now until the end of the year? But I think you've talked about this before too. You only get 4?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Unless emergency doesn't count against that.
An emergency
And also
qualifies what? As
you
injuries.
still have to be cap compliant.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's the other thing.
I mean, this whole Cam Atkinson situation, Ed Encina did a great article. If you haven't read it, I recommend you go find it on Atkinson and kind of Atkinson's role on the team and why they sent him down and he had to clear waivers. And really, they sent him down and he had to clear waivers to be sent down. They needed his $900,000 salary to be freed up to acquire Bjorkstrand and Gord. And what they told Atkinson was, we don't want you in the minors. We want you on the NHL roster, but we need to make this move to get this deal done. And then once we've accrued enough extra cap space, it should take about a week, apparently, is what Julian told Atkinson. We're going to call you back up. That's exactly what happened. So, look, we weren't privy to this information when they put Atkinson on waivers. With the benefit of 2020 hindsight, it makes sense. But now that they've called Atkinson back up and he's on the team, I mean, I don't think the Lightning have a lot of wriggle room as far as the cap is concerned because they've added the Gord salary 25%. They've added all of Bjorkstrand's salary. So it's not just you only get the 4 recalls. It's also can you make the cap work?
Which is probably more important at this point.
Yeah.
To some,
Yeah. I mean, for the Lightning, they did a good job keeping the roster number lower than the maximum to free up enough cap space to make this deadline deal. Now that they've made the deal, they had to free up a little bit more money to get Atkinson back up. But now he's up. So I haven't looked at Puckpedia to see how much actual room they have, but I think that they are going to be somewhat limited in making voluntary recalls. Emergency recalls, different story. Like you get a rash of injuries, and you're forced to play short maybe, then you can do an emergency recall.
This kind of goes to what you're saying, and this question comes from Dale. He says, do you think we see Logan Brown at all?
Well, that was something that Julian floated. He actually said that because the Lightning signed Logan Brown and sent him down too before the deal was done. We'll see. Logan Brown's doing well, though, in Syracuse. I mean, Syracuse had this incredible weekend. They scored like 17 goals and a back-to-back sweep over Springfield, and Logan Brown had his fingerprints on a lot of those goals. So he's doing well. He would be a depth guy with NHL experience, for sure.
I want to see if I can get this question in. This one, more of just an observation on Howard, Isaac Howard, wanting to know when his next game is because the playoffs begin soon, right?
Yeah. So
And
first
you
of
laid
all,
that out pretty good.
congratulations to Isaac Howard. He
Yeah.
is a final top 10 finalist for the Hobie Baker. They whittle it down like you have different phases, right? And he is now a finalist in the top 10. So good luck to him. He's having a great year at Michigan State. So there are the conference tournaments. I believe those conference tournaments are still ongoing, and the championships may be this weekend. People who are really in the know, not even really in the know, moderately in the know. I'm not in the know at all on college hockey because I'm not paying attention to it. But I did see that Howard was named Hobie Baker finalist, Final 10. So Big Ten championships is this weekend. Thank you, Steve. So that was my guess, that the conference championships are this weekend. People are very much tuned into the March Madness basketball tournament. We know the conference tournament's just finished, and the actual March Madness tournament, like they had those couple of games, whatever it was, Tuesday, right? But the actual tournament starts today. Hockey is basically a week behind. So Michigan State is alive in the Big Ten championship tournament, or the Big Ten tournament. And so they have a chance to win that championship. I'm fairly certain they will get, if they don't win the championship, an at-large bid because they've had a very good season. So they'll be part of one of the 16 teams that will be playing for the NCAA championship.
And there's that component too, and I don't know how much of it, probably a little bit. You also want to see one of the best players compete, right?
Mhm.
In a space like that as well. So you would think
Sure.
you want to do everything you can to promote, as you continue to see those numbers, which, look, you laid it out, and I think Eric laid it out when he was filling in for you. You both have talked about this. Howard can almost force his hand a little bit by saying, look, I'd like to play this year, or I could go somewhere else.
Right. Like
Right.
if he gets a game, he's a step closer to his next contract.
Yes.
So he would
And-
have to sign, and he can't sign until his college season is done. And he has to make
Correct.
the choice that he's going to turn pro. Those are the NCAA rules.
Yep.
Unlike junior hockey. Junior hockey players and amateur can sign a contract. It just doesn't start kicking in until he turns pro.
Yep.
College players, it's a different situation. You cannot even sign a contract, which is why these players who've been drafted are just kind of going through their college careers, but they haven't signed a contract yet. So they are not committed to the team that drafted them. If Howard chooses to turn pro this year, his college season ends, he signs his contract with the Lightning. He could sign his contract and just go to Syracuse, right? And
Yep.
he wouldn't burn a year of his entry-level deal. But if he signs his contract and plays even one game in the NHL, that counts as 1 year burned. Usually the college players sign a 2-year entry-level deal, which means he has one more year, and then he's due his next contract. So it's more advantageous for the player to basically burn that first year.
Correct.
If he can.
Yeah.
And he is under no obligation to sign with the Lightning. So that's why some players use this as a bargaining chip. It's like, well, I will sign with you, but I want to get that one game in. So it's going to help my contract status.
Do you think? I understand. I'm asking you to get in the heads of people here, and we have no ability to do that. But based off of his ability, where the Lightning are, could you see a scenario where he does play in the playoffs? Or do you think that's a stretch from where you sit?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, Greg, I have no idea.
And if he does,
I mean,
maybe this is a better
we're,
question.
We're presuming that everything is going to unfold exactly how I just explained it.
Well, it usually does.
Howard could choose to go back for a fourth year at Michigan State too.
Would you be surprised about
It's
that?
completely off the table.
I'd be
That's
surprised
his
by that.
choice. I have
It is
no
his
idea
choice.
what he
That is
wants
his
to
choice.
do. He may say, you know what, I'm a Hobie Baker finalist. I'm going to kind of see what else is out there. I may run out the clock on my draft situation and basically become a free agent. He could do that. That's the danger that comes with drafting a player that's going to commit to going to college, right? You can't get the player signed until the college part of that player's career is done.
That's true.
But if Howard says, I want to sign with the Lightning, I'm turning pro as soon as Michigan State season is over, they've assured me that I'm going to get a game.
Yep.
So I'm burning that first year. Does that mean that he would be with the team in the playoffs? Does that mean that he would get in a game in the playoffs or multiple games? Who knows? Chris Kreider did it. Chris Kreider played for BC and won a national title at Amalie Arena in 2012.
Yeah. And signed those
And then
papers
went
right there,
to
right?
the Rangers. Yeah, went right to the Rangers, and you can look it up. He was part of their 2012 playoff team that got to the conference final. That is unusual, though. And the Rangers were, if I'm not mistaken, they won the President's Trophy that year. So they already had a really, really good team. If they didn't win the President's Trophy, for sure they were the number one seed in the East. So Kreider was coming into a team that was, really solid team. But they found a spot for him. I'm going to look it up, see what he did in that playoff year.
No, you're spot on when it comes to the details of that. I'm just curious if that were to happen, what would that signal to us regarding where Tampa Bay is at the time?
Well, what
You know
it
what I mean?
signals to me is not anything that the Lightning find to be lacking on their team. It's just that Howard's ability to impact a game and his ability to help the Lightning be a better team overrides any other concern about a young player who's new to the NHL or anything like that. So we're going to see how this unfolds. Yeah, so Kreider played for BC in 2011-2012. They won the national title. He was a point-per-game guy with BC, and then he joined the Rangers. He played 18 games in the playoffs that year, and I believe I can confirm that they played 20. So he played in all but 2 of those games.
How'd he do? Do you have his point production?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I went to a different page, so let me go back. He had 5 goals and 7 points in 18 games. For a guy, that was his first NHL game, was a playoff game.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure why he didn't get into any regular season games. Maybe that year, the Frozen Four coincided with the end of the regular season. But that is quite a jump. And was kind of the bellwether for what Kreider would mean to the Rangers moving forward. I mean, here we are 13 years later, and he's still, one of their top players. So
it'll be something to keep an eye on because I think a lot of people are interested in that story developing, and I think a lot of people will look at that and say, if he's somebody who can give you some added juice, for a position that we think has been addressed, but you can always use sometimes more, and especially in the playoffs when certain players elevate their play, is that going to be part of the Lightning's repertoire, so to speak, of trying to win a Stanley Cup?
Well, what has been more typical for the college player who ends up signing the contract with the team that drafted him is that at the end of that final year, they go to the minors and play in the playoffs. And we saw that with Dylan Duke last year.
Correct.
Dylan Duke finished at Michigan. Michigan got eliminated. He signed his contract. He didn't play in the NHL, as we know. He made his NHL debut this year, scored in that debut in Detroit, which is a great moment for him. But at the end of last year, it's not like the Lightning brought him to the NHL roster and he played in the playoffs against Florida, but he did play for Syracuse in the playoffs. But he didn't burn a year of his entry-level deal. He was allowed to play for Syracuse. And I'm not quite sure, the fans probably know. I think you almost signed like a tryout agreement maybe to play. But you can do it because your college career you've decided that your college career is over.
Correct.
So.
It is.
Then there are the free agents. I mean, sometimes a player is just a free agent. He hasn't been drafted, and he's been a good college player. And J.T. Brown fell into that category. He was playing in Minnesota Duluth, won an NCAA title there. The next year, he finished his college career. I think he was there 3 years. He wasn't there 4. And the Lightning signed him as a free agent, and he got in a game. It was right at the end of that year, which was the year that Stamkos, same year, 2012, the year that Stamkos scored 60. And Brown got into 3 or 4 games at the end of that season and burned a year of his entry-level deal, right? But that was a carrot. So JT Brown was a free agent. He's like, I can go wherever I want. He's like, okay, I like what the Lightning have. I like, what they're offering me in terms of a contract, but also they're guaranteeing me that I can get into some games here, so I'm one step closer to my next contract. Schuster was the same way.
What is very interesting is that I think you could probably say this in every league. A lot of times people do think that the players don't have a ton of leverage throughout their careers. I think players' unions maybe have gotten a little stronger over the years. I think we've talked about certain concessions. Certainly the players are making more money in every league. I think that would be the biggest thing you take from players' rights and where are players today. But we also know more games have been added. We do know that there's a more taxing schedule to a degree with how these players are being used. Football continues to creep up the schedule with more games, and college football's not too far behind. It's all in the name of money, but a lot of people will feel, partner, that the athlete maybe doesn't have still the most leverage in a lot of these situations as the owners do. And so when do you have those times as a player to really call your own shots? Mm-hmm. And in that particular instance, maybe that is a situation where, you aren't going to have many of those moments, but when you do, you try and get the best deal. Always comes down to the best deal. And even in that setting, coming out of college and trying to figure out if you want to sign, if you want to go back to school, probably one of the few instances where a player does. And you don't blame them for trying to max out, so to speak.
No.
Those opportunities.
Well, look, most people, if they have a career in mind, they start a career, and unless they choose to change careers, which is their choice, or things don't work out for them in that career, and they're kind of forced to look for another career, usually we're looking at decades, right?
Yep.
For the athlete, that shelf life is just shorter. It is. So they have to maximize their earning potential best they can while they're able to perform. I mean, there aren't a lot of careers out there that essentially end by the time you're into your mid to late 30s. But the life of a professional athlete usually has come into an end for most of them, if not earlier.
Right.
So you're right. I mean, you try and use the leverage that you have to maximize what you can get. Now, if you're playing at the major league level, you are earning quite a bit. I mean, it's different than certainly like 40, 50 years ago. I was having this conversation I was with my family. I'm trying to remember. It might have been the trade deadline. We were talking about kind of players and free agency and all of that. And I'm like, free agency didn't used to exist. Like, there was a time when the player was basically like property of the team indefinitely until that player stopped playing. And, sports historians probably know this better than me, but Curt Flood famously,
Cardinals
in baseball,
right? Cardinals, right?
He was like, no, I should have a say in kind of my future here. Marvin Miller was the lawyer, and they basically created free agency in baseball in the 70s, and the other sports followed suit. So it's not like you can just pick your team from day one, but after a certain number of years of service, you earn the right to be able to kind of shop around and see what's out there. It was a huge game changer. I mean, getting player unions involved was big too, and Phil has some stories about like the NHLPA when he played. I mean, it was the Red Wings guys, I think. It was like Ted Lindsay it wasn't only the Red Wings guys, but like Ted Lindsay was really big in helping the players form a union, and that was very, very important in advancing kind of what we would call player rights, and the ability for players to kind of dictate their future a little bit more. But that was a huge game changer. But free agency, if not for Curt Flood and Marvin Miller, it's hard to imagine the sports world without that. But, it wasn't that long ago that it didn't exist. Now you look at, the NBA is a great example of a league in which the players in the NBA seem to have, and I don't know that league as well, but they seem to have more control than the players in the other leagues, just based on how the rules are set up and how impactful the top players are, right? Because, you don't have that many players on a roster. So, a player can say, well, I'm going to go to this team, but I also want these other players to join me on this team, and they can kind of almost orchestrate that. And then a team goes from being like a bottom team or maybe a middling team to a like a team filled with superstars. We've seen that recently. But that's due to free agency. It's due to the ability of players to kind of, pick their path. Anyway, we went off
a fascinating
on a tangent there.
Yeah,
but
it's
it's very interesting.
It's a fascinating
That's the
discussion.
Sports business side of things.
And it's always relevant because that stuff always impacts the game. Heck, we were talking about the Four Nations tournament. Why do you think that was played in part to grow the game? But I'm sure down the road there's a belief there from a financial perspective that it's going to pay off. And
it was important to the players.
It was important.
Players
We
had a
talk
vote.
about negotiations.
Yeah.
There's a reason, that does go down. So I think it's something to kind of keep in mind, moving forward when these things do develop. You want to take a look at some of the action that happened last night too, because it's gonna
Toronto
impact.
edged Colorado. So right now, Florida and Toronto are tied.
Yeah.
Same number of points, same number of games played. The Lightning have a game in hand. They're 2 points back. All three teams are in action tonight. So this is a back-to-back for Toronto. They're at the Rangers. Huge, huge game for the Rangers, who apparently, I saw the final score. They lost at home to Calgary. Well, Calgary's in the mix to get in the
they are.
playoffs. So it's not like Calgary didn't have anything at stake. But Calgary was playing a back-to-back after having gotten blown out the night before, and they played their backup goalie. And the Rangers laid a complete total egg. They were in wild card 2, playing at home against a team like they had a circumstantial advantage. And not only did they lose, they didn't play very well, and they got leapfrogged by Montreal. The Rangers, I would be very surprised if the Rangers don't play like a team that's fit to be tied tonight. I think that's going to be a tough matchup for Toronto. Or it just goes in the other direction.
Yeah.
Like the Rangers laid an egg and like they can't recover from it. But that hasn't really been their way this year. They've kind of been like wobbly. Like they play well for a little bit, then they have a stinker, and then they kind of come back. And like they're in the mix. They have a lot more at stake in that game than Toronto does. Toronto does play. Florida is at Columbus.
Yeah.
Same deal. Columbus has a lot at stake.
For sure.
Lightning are just facing a team that's very, very hot at home and in a different boat than the Rangers or Columbus.
Is it fair to say while maybe Washington and Columbus are the surprise teams this year in terms of where they are and how well they've played, Rangers may be one of the most disappointing teams considering the expectations, I think, coming in. Now, who gives you those expectations? A lot of times it's media and they have it. But I think
they were the top team in the East last year,
right?
seeding-wise.
So I think there was reason for that.
Disappointing year.
Come on, for them not to make the playoffs with that roster.
Well, when the Lightning saw them right after Christmas and the Lightning hammered them, they were flailing, and they had been flailing for a while. They've made some seismic changes to their roster. Just look at the roster on opening night and look at their roster now, and look at the players that they moved out. Look at some of the players they've brought in. I think in late December, we would have said this season has been a huge disappointment for the Rangers. They've pulled themselves back into the mix. So I think it's still going to be viewed as disappointing. But if they can salvage a playoff berth out of it, it'll be less disappointing. They'll kind of say, look at our second half. And, we were able to pull things together well enough to get into the playoffs. And I tell you what, Greg, should the Rangers get in as wild card 2, and it's not guaranteed. I mean, I was saying Ottawa's kind of locked in at wild card 1. I mean, they got a 4-point lead on Montreal. There's a lot of runway left in terms of jockeying for those positions. But just go with me here. If the Rangers get in and they get in as wild card 2 and they're going to draw Washington in the first round, I'm way more confident saying that. Washington is going to get wild card 2. That is going to be a very interesting first round matchup because, like, from top to bottom, the Rangers just have way more playoff experience than the players on the Washington Capitals. You're going to have this huge point gap between the teams in terms of the regular season finish projecting, but it's going to be a huge gap between Washington and whoever the Capitals play. But the Rangers they'll just have more pedigree than the Capitals. That's different if the Caps see Montreal or Columbus. To an extent, the Islanders. I mean, the Islanders at least have been in the playoffs more often than Columbus has, right? Or Montreal has the last few years. But the Rangers are they're a different sort of challenge, right? I mean, a lot of those players have been part of the Rangers winning playoff series. And they haven't gotten to the Stanley Cup final, but, you know, they got to the conference final, lost to the Lightning. They got to the conference final, lost to the Panthers last year. That would be a tricky matchup for Washington.
Sure.
In my opinion.
I would agree. I think Washington still is the little bit of the unknown just based off
and that's why. Right.
Where they are. And, you know, again, some of that's expectations too. You know, there weren't a ton of expectations for them coming into the season. So when you exceed them, you have a tendency to have people still look at it and say, well, I want to see what it looks like when things are real.
Right.
And I think that's probably fair. And, you know, we'll kind of see how that plays out. I want to get to this question here as well. This is from Reddy on YouTube. Is Kucherov hurt? He scored, but looks like he's a little hurt.
Well, I don't think, based on what we've heard,
I
he's
hear
not
that a
hurt.
lot.
He was under the weather.
Yeah.
He was under the weather and missed the game against Philadelphia at Philadelphia.
Which, look, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, if the Lightning, yes, they're fighting for first place. They want to finish as high as they can. If they do that, most likely they're playing very well towards the end of the season. But we also know, too, if you've got some star players banged up within reason, it may be strategic to hold guys out here and there. You can't hold out 5 players.
Right.
You're probably going to have to do what? How many at most? You know, depending on the position.
Well, they don't have the roster
Yeah,
flexibility unless they're going to play short, right?
Right, which, you know, obviously you don't. But, I mean, like, if you have a guy who's really banged up, you know, you've got to look at what's best for the team. And But you can't sit 6 people. And I look, we all get caught up in that, what the Spurs used to do back in the day when they had Tim Duncan. And they had, you know, they go on the road and they'd sit Ginobili, Parker, and Duncan.
Yeah, a basketball team can have players who are just DNP. Like they're sitting on the bench and they don't get into a game. So they're there, but they're resting. Hockey is different. If you're dressing, you're playing. You may play more, you may play less than some of your teammates, but you're playing. By the way, I just want to mention Johansson I think the Lightning had about 7 guys out, and Johansson was the only goalie. So Vasilevsky, you would expect to see him in net, and it looks like Chaffee and Atkinson, again, are out there late with another forward, but the Lightning don't have they have a defenseman at the other end, kind of just working on shooting from the blue line.
Yeah.
So it looks like the extras. My guess is the extras are going to be Chaffee and Atkinson, and the Lightning are going to go 11-7 again. For sure, it looks like they're going 11-7, and the fact that Chaffee and Atkinson are out there late with another guy might be Gonçalves. But I think based on what we've seen, it's going to be the same lineup for the Lightning.
Does that tell us anything?
The last couple of games
against this team, the Stars? You would go with that lineup, or is it
yeah,
just,
well,
you know,
the 11-7 when you're the road team does complicate things for the home team as far as matching. But again, when the Lightning are using this version of 11-7, where Glendening and Girgensons are the 2 forwards on a line with an open spot, it is a little different than when it's like Hagel and Sorelli as the line of 2, right? So I don't know. I mean, the lineup has worked well for them this year, and it's worked well for them the last couple of games, which they won both.
Yeah, that part's I couldn't agree more from that perspective for sure. I think it's just interesting, that lineup, and that to me will be one of the real interesting components to the Lightning when they do head into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Is the lineup and how that's going to look and kind of where things go.
Well, tonight that's the lineup they're going with. It's hard
Yeah.
to argue with, that choice because they've had success using that sort of lineup. They have the 7 defensemen. It may be also they don't want to sit one of those 7 defensemen. And they've all done pretty well. So they're keeping that lineup. We did get a question from Jim in Jacksonville. Jared sent that along. Jim writes, in 2017, I was in Dallas to see the Lightning play the Stars, a very emotional night, as the Stars honored broadcaster Dave Strader as he was battling cancer. I know Strader was close to his former ESPN partner, Brian Engblom. Yes, they were very close. I was actually glad to see Dallas win the game in overtime, a class act by all the players to salute the broadcast area after the game. Dave, what are your memories from that night 8 years ago? I remember that because that was in the 2016-17 season, Greg, when Strader... So I remember seeing Dave Strader calling games on radio when the Lightning were in the Stanley Cup final against Chicago in 2015. And he told me, I'm going to be in Dallas next year. Like he had just... I mean, he'd been an NHL broadcaster for years, ESPN, with different teams. But he was starting in Dallas in 2015-16. And he was there that year. And then either late that year, maybe over the summer, he got his cancer diagnosis. And he missed much of the year that Jim is referencing, 2016-17, because he was undergoing treatment. But he did come back, and this was in the second half of the year. He came back and did that game. I don't know if that was the last game he did, but he did not do many more games if he did more games after that. And that was, it coincided with the Lightning having a furious push down the stretch to try and get in the playoffs, which they missed by a point. So in their last 30 games, the Lightning went 20, 6, and 4. They won 20, they lost 6 in regulation, they lost 4 in overtime. One of those 4 losses in overtime, that was that game here in Dallas. So what I remember about that game was the Lightning were really desperate for points. I probably didn't feel quite as like generous as Jim about the fact that the Stars got the second point because the Lightning really needed that second point. It may have been Ben. Ben may have scored in overtime, if I'm remembering right. But I do remember the Stars player saluting Dave Strader because he had been away. He'd been away having his treatments and came back for that game. And it was shortly thereafter that he passed away. He and Brian were very, very close, for sure. Good guy. Really good guy. Great broadcaster.
How long did you know him?
So since I came into the NHL. At one point, he was in Florida. And we saw each other a lot when Dave was in Florida. I don't think he was there from my first year with the Lightning, which was 02-03. I think Jakes McDonald was doing the games. Although Jakes might have been on radio at that point. Maybe Dave Strader was doing TV. It all kind of runs together. The Panthers had a kind of a weird run there where they had a few different guys. Jeff Rimmer was there for a while. Jeff did TV for sure. And then Steve Goldstein took over on radio and eventually moved to TV. And they've had a lot of stability there for quite a while. But like in the early to mid 2000s, they had a little bit of a revolving door, and Dave was there for a while. But yeah, he was broadcasting for various teams and doing national games for decades, before I came to the NHL and joined the Lightning.
It's a good question. Good perspective.
Tragic.
Yeah,
he was
for
a young
sure.
man
Yeah.
still. Had a lot of good years ahead of him. But
Yeah. Just
cancer,
those blessings.
cancer is one of the, it does not discriminate.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It impacts everybody,
Yeah.
to a degree. All right. Well, we got a game tonight. 8 o'clock, right, partner? So I'm up a little later. I mean, you
A
will.
little bit later. It's going to get...
It's
going to
worse.
get later in terms of where we are in the time zone, but it's going to get a little earlier. Well, the Saturday game is 5 o'clock, and then Sunday is 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Vegas time. But tonight it's 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock face-off, and you're on the air at 7:30.
I will talk to you as we get a little closer to puck drop as well in the pregame, and then you and I back at it tomorrow live.
Yep.
Recapping, hopefully to win.
My first ever trip to Salt Lake City. Utah is a state I've never been to. Never had
Should be fun.
occasion to go to Utah, so I'm checking that one off the list, and I'll talk to you from Utah.
How many states
tomorrow.
have you visited now? If you
Well,
check
if they
that
don't
one
have a
off?
hockey team, I probably haven't been there. I mean, yes, I've traveled to some just through life, but
You haven't been to
kind of
Montana.
yeah, those states.
I
and
have.
kind of the big
I have.
mountain, Wyoming, Idaho. No, I've
Probably
never been
pretty.
there.
Probably pretty. out
Yeah,
there at
it's
certain
beautiful.
times,
I'd love to go at some point.
You
Never
know?
been to Alaska. Never been to Hawaii.
Okay. Well,
Alaska had a hockey team. We were talking about Jack Michaels, but I
Right.
never had an opportunity to go there.
well, you have the opportunity to go to Utah, and we appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, partner. I'll talk to you tonight.
Talk to you
And then
tonight.
tomorrow. Thanks, everybody who listened. Thanks to Steve Ersnick, Jared Johnston. I am Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.